This is Alice in Muggleland, with your hosts, Bilius McDaniels of the No-Maj Liaison Office, and Alice, the Muggle that got lost following the White Rabbit.
It is time for another episode of Alice in Muggleland. I am one of your hosts, No-Maj Liaison Official Bilius McDaniels, and I need to find Alice. Asio Alice.
What does that mean?
Oh, I just summoned you, that's all.
I was sitting right here. This is awkward.
Yes it is. So how are you, Alice?
I'm doing well. Bilius, how are you?
I am doing okay. What's going on in the Muggle world?
Not much news from Muggleland. I'm quite worried about Hawaii still being there after the end of all these volcanoes. Do you guys have anything to do with that?
I would have to cast a memory charm on you, and that would be impossible to go through and cast it on everybody else that would be listening to this.
Well, then I guess you better not tell me. Is that the wizard version of I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you?
No, that's the wizard version of deleting memories that you were given.
I see.
No, I don't kill, so that's what we have the death rooms for.
Death rooms. Can you give me a memory charm so that I don't remember you ever mentioning those?
Maybe.
Okay.
But before we do that, let's go into our next chapter, Chapter 4, The Keeper of the Keys.
Okay, then.
So, where we last left off, it just literally turned Harry's birthday.
Yes.
It was left in a cliffhanger.
Right.
And that cliffhanger turned out to be the Keeper of the Keys at Hogwarts, who we met in Chapter 1, Hagrid.
Hagrid. Apparently he also has a first name. Was it Rubius?
Rubius, yep.
Kind of made me want a sandwich. Yeah, so literally the last chapter ended with him banging on the door, and now he's in the hut on the hill in the sea.
Hut on the rock in the sea.
Yes, that's it. So, he's there. Interesting character, this Hagrid.
Why do you say that?
Well, so far, he reminds me of nobody so much as he reminds me of Mary Poppins. So, I mean, he flies in from the sky on a motorcycle as opposed to an umbrella in Chapter 1. But now he shows up with a coat instead of a carpet bag. It seems to serve the same purpose. He has a lot of stuff in that coat, including a cake for Harry, which there was something that really troubled me in this chapter. He gave Harry the cake, but then there is no mention of eating the cake. And I have never been one who really understood that saying about having your cake and eating it too, because as far as I'm concerned, there is no point in having a cake if you don't then eat it too. So they talk about eating the sausages. There's no mention of eating the cake in this chapter. I just think that's really strange.
Maybe in that regard, Harry had a little bit more on his mind than trying to figure out how to eat his cake.
Yeah, but then he was eating the sausages just fine. So I feel like the cake was there and then it disappeared. And I don't know.
Have you tried eating a piece of cake with your hand? Like a slice of cake that might have been sat on your trip? And eating a sausage, which is a little bit more... like it has its own casing that's easier to...
I'm telling you, it wouldn't matter to me. I think you should eat the cake first, just because life is unpredictable, just as has been demonstrated by Hagrid showing up to the hut on the rock in the sea. Very specific addressing on these letters, which is very amusing. So, right, the floor.
The floor, too.
It's very specific where Harry is. So, to sort of build on something I was saying last week. So last week, we have the Dursleys, especially Vernon Dursley, fighting like mad against destiny, against fate. In particular, Harry's destiny and Harry's fate. As I had said, I knew they had a letter from Dumbledore, because that was mentioned in Chapter 1, which they clearly never shared with him. And then these weird things happen around him, and they just punish him. Because, one, they don't really understand how these things are happening, but obviously in the back of their heads, they realize that this has something to do with the wizarding stuff. Right. So now Destiny has caught up with them in the form of Hagrid, who I really can't think of a better example of just destiny showing up and almost literally punching you in the face. It's like, here's Hagrid. I mean, he comes bursting through this door. He threatens him with an umbrella. I mean, this is like, apparently he turns Dudley into like a partial pig. He gives him a pig's tail, which is really, wow. So yeah, this is definitely, Destiny making itself known. And I can't help but think that if they had told Harry at least a little bit about where he came from and what his past was, that this meeting would have been a little bit more pleasant for the Dursleys.
And you also have to remember, the first thing that Hagrid basically does is take the rifle that Dursley bought out of his hand and bends it into a pretzel, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great, mental picture. Hagrid, apparently pro gun control. Interesting character, this Hagrid. And we get some kind of interesting hints about his background. So he is clearly very close to Dumbledore, and yet he is not just a Hogwarts dropout, but he was actually expelled from Hogwarts, so that's very tantalizing.
That is true in that case, and he still does magic, as we see in this regard.
Yeah, a little bit.
He was given permission to give magic, at least it says in the book.
Right.
But we find out a lot more about Harry's story, and I think this falls again into line with what you were saying last week about Harry not actually being a part of his own fate at this time.
Right. I mean, he's been completely passive so far in these books. He's still being passive, but at least now he's finding out that he's that he's special. So this is...
You're a wizard, Harry.
Exactly. He's a wizard. This is a sort of wish fulfillment that you see in a lot of stories. It's actually often criticized, but you have this marginalized character who is special, he just doesn't know it. You see this story gets played out over and over again in various forms. Another version of that is there's the girl who wears glasses, and when she takes them off, she's hot. She just didn't know it. Yeah, so this is basically what's going on here. Is the story we've all heard before, where this character is special for reasons that they could not have known. For example, Dorothy gets sucked up into a tornado, and now she's in Oz, and she's special in Oz. Alice is special, but only after she falls down the rabbit hole. So yeah, this is a story that we've all heard and read before, where this is a character who's not special in any particular way, except secretly he is. So we'll see how that continues to play out for him.
Let me ask a question, because you gave the examples of Alice and Dorothy. Basically, when they got into Wonderland and got into Oz, they were still their normal selves. They didn't have any additional inbred powers. Isn't that right?
Right, but Harry's been this character all along, too. I mean, that's why these weird things have happened when he gets upset or angry. So he still has he's still the person he's been the entire story. He's just, now he's special. That's kind of, again, it's this, like wish fulfillment type story that we see a lot of told over and over again.
So in regards to Harry's story, we find out a little bit that the reason, like was brought up in an earlier chapter, that the reason that he is making these things happen to him is by magic. Hagrid actually speaks about things happening to Harry when he was upset or angry. That shows about magic coming out of Harry while he was younger. That happens with younger wizards in general. Right,
but it's not only that Harry's a wizard here. What's interesting to me about this is I would think that the learning that you're a wizard would be the headline here. But that kind of gets buried with the fact that not only are you a wizard, you are the offspring to be of two very famous wizards. You yourself are already very famous in the wizarding world. And it's expected that you'll be the greatest wizard that ever went to Hogwarts if you just go there. So he's not just special, but he's special. You could talk about, stories in which somebody finds out that, not only are they secretly royalty, but they're royalty who is particularly special royalty. First in line to be the king kind of a thing. It's interesting to me that this story is not playing out slowly. It's not just, oh, you're a wizard, And then later he finds out that he's famous in the wizarding world and that everybody knows his name. No, he's getting this whole information dump from Hagrid in this chapter. Your parents were killed right in front of you. You were almost killed but survived and nobody understands why. And you are very famous in the wizarding world because after trying to kill you, Voldemort disappeared.
And he could still be alive,
Right.
and who knows what might go on with him.
This is definitely a chapter where we're getting just a whole bunch of exposition, but not necessarily for the reader. The reader already knows all this. This is a chapter of exposition for Harry. Presumably, this will start to transition him out of this passive role and into a more active role in his future. But right now, he's still just along for the ride, and he's just being told all the stuff that we already knew from back in chapter 1.
I'm thinking that when Harry starts to make more active, starts actually making decisions for himself, really, I think, will be in chapter 6. I'm not going to explain how, but I think that's where you're going to start seeing where Harry starts to make more decisions for himself. These chapters really are a bunch of exposition to explain more about the Wizarding World and his situation.
Sure. But what's interesting to me is that this is all exposition for his benefit. And it's interesting to me that Hagrid feels he needs to know all of this, not just you're a wizard, but there's this stuff. He even hesitates. And I wondered at that moment if he was going to tell him everything. Because he hesitates and kind of says, I'm not sure it's my place to tell you. But then he goes ahead and tells him. So he's not just going to be entering Hogwarts as I thought I was just a muggle and now it turns out I'm a wizard. It's like he's going to be entering Hogwarts with the knowledge hanging over him that he's expected to do great things there. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects his character.
And this is also going to about Hagrid being put into a tight spot because in theory, Harry was supposed to already know all of this.
Yeah, the Dursleys were supposed to tell him. And of course they didn't. But for someone like Dumbledore, who made a reasonable decision that maybe growing up as a celebrity was not the best thing for Harry. So maybe growing up in the wizarding world wasn't a great choice. That's what he said. I think it probably also had to do with keeping him safe while he was still very vulnerable as a small child. Dumbledore made this decision, put them with these characters. The cat lady, Professor McGonagall, told him, I've been watching these guys all day, this is not a good idea. And he did it anyway. So this could not have been an unexpected outcome to Dumbledore. Now, whether obviously Hagrid's outraged that they chose not to tell him anything, but it occurs to me that Dumbledore must have known that was a real possibility.
Yeah, Dumbledore says something about that in book 6.
So it's
you'll have a few years to get
yeah, we've got a few years to go before we get there. So, spoiler alert.
Hey, I didn't say what. I just said when.
Yeah. So, I feel for Hagrid. I feel like he's a bit of a chatty Cathy. Because I think if I were in his position, I might have said, well, yeah, you're a wizard. You go ahead and meditate on that for a little bit before I throw all this other information at you. And here, eat your cake. Jesus. He must have had a fork in that jacket somewhere.
What did you think about Petunia's explosion in the chapter?
I have to admit, I had a moment where I felt for her. And that sounds weird given all of the, basically deceit that has gone into keeping Harry in the dark, both literally and figuratively. It's obvious that her real hatred for her sister, and it's interesting how she twisted this from one thing into the other, her real hatred from her sister came out of envy. Her sister was special, and she wasn't. And the way she dealt with that was to not only reject her sister, and reject how her sister was special, by basically writing off the whole wizarding, witching world. But she also really internalized the not specialness. She wanted to have the least special life that anybody has ever lived. I think that's really interesting. That's an interesting choice. She did not try to distinguish herself in any particular way other than being just as normal as possible. So she married somebody else who felt very much the same way. They had this child who was only exceptional in so much as he was, banal, not very bright, not very interesting, kind of a sadist. And they doted on him. And I think it's also very telling to note that they haven't had any other children of their own. They might not have said this to themselves, but I suspect it's because they did not want to have Dudley go through the same sort of comparison that she went through with her sister. And so when Harry shows up, this plan goes out the window for them because now he has a de facto sibling. But they decide to make it, well, we're going to make it really obvious that you guys are not on equal footing here and you're going to live in the cupboard under the stairs. It really does explain a lot, so that her hatred really comes from the fact that she was envious of her sister and the attention her sister got from her parents. They really didn't want to have a second child because they didn't want Dudley to experience that kind of a thing. And when Harry showed up, they really didn't want Dudley to ever have a moment's thought that he might not be as special as Harry because she had gone through this. So really, this becomes a story of her. She was not a very nice person towards Harry. It was all coming out of this desire to protect her son from what she had gone through as a kid. So doesn't make her a good person, but it makes her slightly more understandable.
It does a lot of understanding with that case. But you would think that knowing all this, they would have probably tried to somewhat prepare better if they expected this to happen. I mean...
Yeah, but this goes back to the denial thing, right? Denial is this force of, and we see it in characters and literature, but we also see it in our real lives, where rationally you understand that the consequences will eventually show up, but you sort of want to push them off indefinitely.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because of something that Vernon said, that he didn't think that he thought that a good beating might have been able to knock it out of him. In theory, what that means is that either one, Vernon didn't beat Harry in case someone noticed, or two, maybe Petunia actually told Vernon that he couldn't.
It's possible. It also suggests to me that, much like Petunia's reacting to her unhappy home life, I think Vernon's reacting to his. I think that suggests to me that probably in his household as a child, that would have been the solution. Maybe he suggested it to Petunia and she shot him down, but I think he clearly thought at some point, as you say, that this was an option.
Do you think Vernon is regretting marrying with Petunia at this point?
I don't know. I don't get that. I think it's, I think he's regretting that, that Harry happened to them. I don't know that he's not seeing themselves as a unit still.
Is there anything else that you read through the chapter that you want to bring up?
So I just want to get back to this. I mentioned it previously, but Hagrid giving Dudley this pig's tail. So I couldn't help but be reminded, of course, of Circe and Odysseus and how she turned Odysseus's men into pigs. And Hagrid, in this case, he doesn't quite complete the transformation. And he makes this comment about how he was mostly pig to start off with. So there wasn't not much of a transformation to do. One, I think that's a little unfair to pigs. Pigs seem like they're noble, thoughtful creatures. I kind of felt like that sentence was funny, because it's like you do something and the consequences are not quite as you intended, and you come up with a quick excuse for, well, I did that. It didn't work because of this. It wasn't because of me, and it wasn't because of something I did. So this might just be a bit of Hagrid's, failure to graduate Hogwarts showing, because clearly his magic is a little dodgy. Just the tail, not the whole pig. I'm curious to see what happens with that pig's tail in the future. If Dudley's going to be hiding this under his school uniform for the rest of the books, or what have you. We may never find out more about the pig's tail, but I hope we do.
I will let you find out on that on your own without giving you any hints or tips about that. In this chapter, favorite character?
Oh, definitely Hagrid. How can you not love Hagrid? He has a pink umbrella, which is very stylish. He has a rumpled owl in his jacket. I too imagine that if I was carrying an owl around in my jacket, it would be a bit rumpled and maybe a little testy. I'm not sure if the owl had an attitude with him or not, but I imagine it could. And yeah, definitely Hagrid. Great character. We've seen him twice now. I hope we see a lot more of him.
Favorite character of the book, in your view?
I'm going to go with Hagrid. He's clearly a well-meaning, if sort of bumbling kind of a guy. Again, not sure if he really should have spilled so much of the story to Harry in the very first meeting. It seems like a lot to absorb, but I think he meant well. And I do agree with you that he was taken by surprise. He did not think that Harry wouldn't know all of this. We shall see. I'm assuming he will be in the next chapter because he's going to be taking Harry shopping for his school supply list. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, they actually break down the list in the next chapter. The next chapter being called Diagon Alley. While everybody is waiting for us to put out the next chapter, please visit us on Twitter. Alice has a Twitter at A in Muggleland. We also have a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Alice in Muggleland. But importantly, we have a Patreon page that will continue to let us bring extra content to you. We have many other special episodes that are going to be Patreon-only episodes for Alice in Muggleland. It's a couple of things that I think that people might find fun and bring more light into the subject of Alice herself. So that address is www.patreon.com/Vicarious Muggleland. Alice, do you want to say anything else before we depart?
Well, I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
I am looking forward to the next episode. Until next time, folks, Knox.
Of it, but you'll definitely hear me bitching about you. So
Yeah, that's fine. I don't care. Well, I do care, but not really. That just makes sense.
You're too easy. I feel like you should have to defend that position.
Yeah, we're both of us are pretty easy if you think about it.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by that?